The Nintendo DS was my first video game console and therefore was a pivotal part of my childhood. I'm sure if you're watching this, the DS probably holds some fond memories for you too, but where would a great console be without its games? The DS gave a platform to some of the greatest games of all time, and to cover them all in one video would be ridiculous, although I'm sure Scott the Waz will eventually make a video doing that. Anyway, today I just wanted to look back on some of my personal favorites, and hopefully one or two of yours shows up here too. If not, feel free to let me know your favorites in the comment section below. So now let's start off with a game nearly everyone who owned a DS played, New Super Mario Bros. At the time, this game was fairly revolutionary. The last 2D side-scrolling Mario game had been released over a decade ago, and New Super Mario Bros. Finally brought it back. Being the first 2D Mario to use 3D models, this game was considered to be quite groundbreaking, and despite the concept of the game being largely the same as its predecessors, it seemed like this had a new modern feel to it. Besides the visuals, this game added a whole bunch of new items and movement options into the 2D Mario experience. Introduced for the first and I think only time in this game was the blue shell. As a kid, I probably spent way too long just sliding across each level with this, and as for another new item, the Mega Mushroom, it certainly wasn't as fun as the blue shell, but using it always felt pretty cool considering you could just walk through the entire level unfazed, although it did kinda seem cheap to use sometimes. But in contrast, the new Mini Mushroom was actually pretty fun to use since it added a whole new element to the gameplay. I much rather have something like this in the game instead of just the Mega Mushroom being a win button. As for new movement, this game introduced the wall jump, triple jump, and ground pound into 2D Mario. While we might take these for granted now, at the time, these additions made the whole gameplay experience a lot more smooth and fun to play. Not saying that games like Mario Bros. 3 and Super Mario World weren't smooth, I just mean that these new movement options were welcome additions. I think that this game really brought something new to the table, and although it would be expanded upon in many future games, something about this original DS version just feels so memorable. And of course, I can't forget to mention these mini games that I'm sure many others like myself put tons of hours into. Before we move away from Mario though, let's touch on one of the most slept on games of its kind, Mario Kart DS. Admittedly, this game might just seem like a waste of time when you compare it to Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, but that's not really fair. I mean, these games are literally a decade apart. Mario Kart DS does have some things in its favor though, with a variety of game modes to choose from. My favorite as a kid was Battle Mode, not for any particular reason or anything, it was just fun for me. As for the normal Grand Prix mode, it was alright. Obviously going through it for the first few times was cool because it was new, but after a while it does get stale. But that was okay, because I put a lot of time into something like Mission Mode. I mean, I was like 4 years old at the time, so I didn't really do that well in these challenges, but that doesn't really matter, because I was having a great time. Outside of single player, this Mario Kart was the first to introduce online play. Now, was it very good? Actually, yeah. I mean, there were a few limitations, like you could only play with 4 racers and a third of the tracks weren't able to be played, but besides that, it was a fun time. I guess one other complaint I have about this game is how few racers there are, but you know what, maybe I'm just spoiled with Mario Kart 8 Deluxe having about 1 million. I guess I want to move on from Mario now though, although I have to mention some other great games like Super Mario 64 DS, Mario Party DS, and the Mario and Luigi games. Next though, let's talk about Pokemon. Alright, you may be wondering, out of the 9 mainline and 11 spin-off games on the DS, which ones will I be talking about today? Well, I think I'll just limit it to the first Gen 5 games and the Gen 2 remakes. I'm not including Pokemon Gen 4 because I don't really like it to be honest, and I'm not including Black and White 2 because I haven't fully played them. Anyway, can we just talk about how good Heart Gold and Soul Silver are? Are they perfect? No, but they sure came close. We have to give these games a pass for some of the archaic design choices at times. I'm sure we would all love to have amazing modern quality of life changes, but hey, that's just how it is. I made a whole video on my thoughts regarding Heart Gold, so I won't go too long about it, but I think that this whole region of Johto just felt so alive and full of content. Aside from the main story of the game, it also had features like the Battle Frontier and the Pokeathlon, not to mention the entire region of Kanto being the main setting for the post-game. I played this game in its entirety like 2 months ago and I had a great time despite its age. Fast forward a few years though, and we got the 5th generation of Pokemon. On release, these games were heavily criticized for locking older generation Pokemon to after the main story, but over time we have grown to appreciate this direction. Too many times had Pokemon games been reliant on other regions' Pokemon, and I think it was a great idea to give Gen 5 its own complete roster just like Gen 1 did. Besides that though, Pokemon Black and White had it all. The sprite work in these is the best out of the 2D era, the music still has some of the best tracks in the entire series despite the questionable audio quality of the DS, Hourglass. And the gameplay, well, it's amazing too. I do have some criticisms about the region of Unova though, and I'm sure you guys can all agree. It's a bit too linear. Like, it's not a big deal or anything, but the fact that we basically get zero input on where we can go is a little disappointing. On a side note, as someone from New York, it was super cool seeing my region of the United States represented in Pokemon. As for the story of the game, well, it certainly is up there with the best I've seen in Pokemon. There are just some occasional scenes in the game that really feel special, like this Ferris wheel ride with N, or watching Bianca's dad realize he's being overprotective of her. Without these little moments, I don't know if I would remember this game as fondly. As for the Gen 5 sequels, I haven't gotten a chance to fully play them through, although the bit I have played of White 2 was amazing. Moving on from Pokemon, let's talk about some of the most underrated 2 games on the DS, The Legend of Zelda Phantom Hourglass and Spirit Tracks. Let's just get the obvious out of the way, these games had a really weird control scheme. Moving Link with the stylus instead of the D-pad was strange, that's for sure. Once you get past that aspect though, these games were actually pretty cool. Phantom Hourglass expanded upon the Great Sea from Wind Waker and once again lets you control your own ship. This time though, you actually get to customize it, which was really cool in terms of personalizing your experience with the game. As for gameplay, it follows a very typical Zelda style overall, although it has a unique factor being that it has a central dungeon you return to over and over again. The Temple of the Ocean King has you explore several floors full of phantoms and puzzles in search of sea charts. The reason why you have to keep coming back though is that this dungeon will drain your life if you don't have the Phantom Hourglass item activated, and this item requires you to leave to recharge it. The whole premise behind this place is that you go through it until you get the item you need to progress the story, and then you come back when you obtain more time in your hourglass. The problem with this is that it gets extremely repetitive since you have to redo all the puzzles you've completed previously each time you re-enter. Overall, Phantom Hourglass is a solid Zelda experience, especially on a handheld, but if I'm being honest, I'm mostly including this game as a setup for the title that followed it, Spirit Tracks. This game is actually one of my favorites on the DS because it took everything Phantom Hourglass did right and expanded on it. Instead of the sea, this time the main form of transportation is via train, which surprisingly worked extremely well despite being such a drastic change. The game starts off in a fairly normal way, with you controlling a Link 100 years in the future from Phantom Hourglass. You obtain your engineering diploma from Princess Zelda and then go to investigate why these spirit tracks are disappearing from the land. However, you are quickly stopped by one of the main antagonists of the game, Chancellor Cole, who separates the spirit of Zelda from her body and runs away. Eventually you reconvene with Zelda's spirit and get the spirit flute, the main instrument of the game. From here we find the main dungeon of the game, the Tower of Spirits, which has a very similar role to the Temple of the Ocean King from Phantom Hourglass. The good thing this time around is that it feels a lot more intentional with its design. First of all, you have a whole new mechanic with Spirit Zelda being able to take control over the phantoms. But more importantly, this place actually has a better reason for you having to come back besides just running out of time. The tower is shattered into several different pieces, and cleansing several other temples in the game opens it further. Besides that, this game has an amazing soundtrack and a surprisingly good story. Like, Link and Zelda actually have great chemistry, and she is far from just the annoying companion we've seen in so many other Zelda games. Overall, this game is extremely underrated to me, and I definitely want to revisit it someday. But the final game I want to talk about is Animal Crossing Wild World. Now, the reason I saved this one for last is because of how important this was to me growing up. I actually do think New Leaf is the best entry in the series, but this is a DS video, not a 3DS one, so I'll talk about the next best option, Wild World. At first, this title looks quite bare bones compared to modern releases, and to be honest, yeah, it is. Nostalgia is a huge factor looking back at a game like this, because if I'm being real, I'd rather play something somewhat more complex. But the simplicity of Wild World is what really made it special. It might not have had any crazy features like a whole separate island or terraforming, but it had some of the best dialogue in the entire series. See, an issue with modern Animal Crossing is how godlike they make you feel. Nobody really ever challenges you since you're the leader of their town. In Wild World, you're moving into their world, and they will treat you in somewhat of a cold way because of that. But as time goes on and you play more and you talk to the villagers, you'll build stronger relationships with them. So yeah, maybe this game didn't have any special features, but it still had an incredible amount of heart, put into arguably the most important part of the game. Honestly, making this video limited to just a few games was pretty hard. I mean, the DS lineup was stacked with classics. I could have talked about games like Professor Layton, Ace Attorney, or even Cooking Mama. So if you want to hear my opinions on more DS games, feel free to leave a comment below, and who knows, maybe you'll inspire another video just like this.